Hello, and welcome to Why the IRB Needs to Know About Blank, a presentation by Solutions IRB. This was actually the topic of our September 2023 Lunch and Learn, so if you missed that, this is a good opportunity to catch up. Now, this topic seems a little broad, and that's because it is. We're going to be going over various items that we often get questioned about as the IRB as why do we need to know? Why do you need to know about recruitment? Why do you need to know about who's getting my consent? So we're going to go over some of those topics today and see exactly why the IRB cares. We'll dive right into this with why the IRB needs to know about recruitment. First item in recruitment that we need to know about is exactly where that recruitment is going to be taking place. If it's going to be posted online on any social media sites or websites, if it's going to be posted in person via flyers or magazines or whatever, we need to know. And part of the reason we need to know is just to ensure that there's no coercion or undue influence happening. For example, if you're posting only online, we want to make sure that if you're posting on social media, it's in appropriate places and not in, specialized groups or places that would be targeting people outside the population for your study. But we also need to know because, for example, if you post on sites like Craigslist, that is a site that's known for job seekers, and that can cause some undue influence for your participants because they might see the compensation from your study and think that they're getting a job. So keep that in mind as you're deciding exactly where to post your recruitment online. If you are posting any recruitment in person, so via like flyers at a physical location, we will need to see permission being obtained from those locations. And the reason we need to see that is ultimately comes down to common courtesy. If you're doing a research study on a weight loss drug and you want to post your recruitment flyers in a gym, but the owners of the gym don't condone that method of weight loss, you might be running into an issue there. And that's part of the reason we need to see some permission forms from those sites that it's being posted. We just want to make sure that you aren't having an issue, that they aren't affecting your recruitment in any way, and ultimately you want to make sure of all those same things. So keep that in mind when deciding where to post your recruitment in person. We also need to know about the timing of recruitment. And I cannot stress this enough. It is really important that you do not start recruitment until your study has been approved. If you start it early, you will be looking at a denial of your study being approved because recruitment is part of the study. It is something we have to review. So definitely ensure that you are not recruiting before your study has been approved by the IRB. We also need to review all the wording in your recruitment documents. And that's just ultimately to eliminate any undue influence. A lot of times you're writing things with good intentions, just trying to, catch their eye, get those people to sign up for your study. But it can sometimes be considered undue influence. So for example, if you're really stressing the compensation or making promises that this will cure your problems, this will cure your illness that you've got, that's something that you might not know, and that's definitely something we don't want to promise in a recruitment material. So we need to review that to make sure that none of that is happening in your recruitment. We also need to review the overall look of your recruitment flyers, and that means that we need to see a final version of your recruitment material to ensure that certain aspects aren't being called to attention or misleading. So, for example, even if your wording all looks good, once we see it in flyer form, you might have the compensation bolded and highlighted and just really drawn attention to that. That's something that we can't see if you're just submitting a document with the words into it. And that's why we need to see that final version of the recruitment to make sure that there's nothing fishy going on. Sometimes we receive a list of what's going to be included in the recruitment materials. So for example, we'll get a document that's got several pictures in it and all the wording in it, but they aren't together. And that unfortunately just doesn't work for us. We are going to need to see the full final version for our review to ensure that there's no coercion or undue influence happening. Let's go over why the IRB needs to know about your personnel CVs or resumes. This is ultimately just to ensure that the team listed on the study are actually qualified and able to perform their assigned duties. If the topic of your research or the research population is equivalent to your experience, you're doing great. However, if it's not, we might have some issues and we might need to bring in some additional personnel to make sure that you are providing the safest experience for the participants. For example, if you are a veterinarian and you want to do a medical study on humans, you might be running into some issues. You might need to bring in an actual human medical doctor into this study. So that's just one of the reasons we need to review a CV or a resume. The next is that it can also reveal any underlying conflicts of interest that the PI or the researcher might not have considered. Oftentimes you are elbow deep in this study. You don't really think about the fact that you owning the company might cause some undue influence or anything like that. So having us review that can ultimately protect you, because while our job is to protect the participants, the best way to protect the participants is to make sure that the team that is doing the research is a fully qualified and safe team to do it. So ultimately, it's going to protect you in the long run. The other thing that CVs can kind of reveal to us as the IRB is age. We at Solutions IRB do not accept any researchers under the age of 18. We have had a few cases of this where, some really gung-ho high school students want to participate in research. It's just not something that's safe for us to allow to happen per our SOPs. So definitely keep that in mind as you are working with your personnel and deciding who should be your research team. Let's go over why the IRB needs to know about conflicts of interest or ownership. This one should be fairly obvious, but again, our job as the IRB is to protect the participants. And in order to protect them, we need to make sure that they have all the information before they commit to being part of your research. So, our job, we ensure that conflicts of interest are mitigated and that if there needs to be any third-party sources brought in, this has been planned for. So for example, if you own the company and all of your researchers are employees of the company that is funding this, that might make some money off of this study, you might need to bring in a third-party, non-biased person to do your statistical analysis at the end, just to make sure there's no bias involved in your results. You might actively be trying to avoid bias, but it's something that's really hard to do when we are this close and this passionate about whatever we're working on. So part of a conflict of interest mitigation plan could be bringing in a third-party source, a third-party personnel. It's also important that we know about these conflicts of interest because, again, participants have the right to know about these instances in the research they participate in. And that's why sometimes the conflict of interest has to be disclosed in the consent form. We want them, like I said, to have all the information up front. They need to know exactly what they're signing up for, and that includes any conflicts of interest or ownership that the researchers might have in whatever the study is about. Another item that comes up often is why the IRB needs to know who will be obtaining the consent. Really, this comes down to the fact that the who can create undue influence in certain situations. So for example, if a doctor is obtaining consent or recruiting their patients, or a school teacher or a counselor is recruiting or getting consent of their students, really anytime any type of authority figure or trusted figure is doing the consenting, this can cause coercion or undue influence. For example, if my teacher in my college course comes up to me and wants me to sign a consent form to be part of a study, I might feel obligated to sign that consent form because I might fear retribution. I might fear getting a bad grade if I don't participate in this research. So you'll want to make sure that any type of authority figures or trusted figures are just kind of avoided in deciding who's going to be obtaining consent. You really want someone that's not biased and someone that your participants might not be super familiar with, and definitely not someone that they'll feel any pressure to sign up for your study with. It's also really important that whoever is obtaining this consent is properly trained on human subjects research. We actually have several links on our website, and you can visit those to get human subjects training certified. It's really important to have that though, because that training just makes sure that those people obtaining that consent really know how to do it appropriately. Another thing to take into consideration is exactly where consent is going to take place, because this can also cause undue influence or coercion. So for example, if you're doing research on a participant's thoughts in their workplace, you probably don't want to get their consent in the break room at that workplace, because they might not want their boss to know that they're being part of this study, or they might not want to be seen talking to you because it might be something that they'll feel they might have some retribution for. So take that into consideration when deciding where exactly you're going to be doing your consent. Another example for this would be getting consent for a focus group. You don't want to get that consent in a group setting, because more often than not, those participants are going to fall for that peer pressure. If my friends said they're going to consent, I'm going to say I'm going to consent because I don't want to feel like the odd one out. You'll definitely want to make sure that you're getting consent on an individual basis and not in a group setting in any way. The next topic is why the IRB needs to know about the funder of the research. The reason we need to know exactly who is funding this research, first and foremost, is that it can create a conflict of interest. If you are the PI on the study and you own a company and your company that you own is funding the research, that all can be a conflict of interest. So that's just something we want to take into consideration so that we can decide if there's any mitigation or any revealing to the participants that needs to be done. The IRB also needs to review any grant contracts or funding contracts that you have to ensure that your application aligns with the activities you were contracted to do. So if you get grant funding to review a math program at a school, and all of a sudden you're asking questions to these students that are totally unrelated to that math program, there might be an issue that comes up for you in terms of funding, and definitely an issue that comes up for you in terms of IRB review. So that's just something that we need to be aware of so we can make sure that everything aligns across the board. Per our SOPs, the applicant must disclose the funder in the application, as the IRB review team cannot fulfill their role in properly identifying potential conflicts of interest or if the funding source should be disclosed to participants if we don't have that information. It is part of our human subjects protections application to disclose this for these reasons. So again, just really stressing that we need to see this because we need to ensure there's no conflict of interest or that it's been mitigated, and whether or not the participants need to know exactly who is funding this. It is a requirement that the funder be disclosed in the consent form to aid in participants making an informed decision to participate. Very rarely this can be avoided, but you do have to meet certain criteria to not include your funder in the consent form. This one might seem like an obvious one, but we have had some questions about this, so we're going to go over it, and that is why the IRB needs to know what tasks the participants are being asked to do. Like I said, this might seem obvious, but there are some moving parts that come with this. The first thing that we actually want to know when it comes to the tasks that they're being asked to do is the timeline. How long are the tasks themselves going to take? When are they going to be completed? How many times are they going to be completed? So we need to see that timeline in full. So you might have a 15-minute survey for participants, but you might have one 15-minute survey the first year and another one 6 years later. We need to know that information, and we need to see the full timeline of the study and all the moving parts within it. The next item that kind of comes hand in hand with these tasks is the compensation. We need to see this so that we can ensure they're being compensated fairly and also make sure they aren't being compensated too much to prevent any undue influence. So for example, if you are doing a 15-minute anonymous survey about people's favorite color, you might not want to compensate those people $200 for that. That would cause some undue influence. If someone offered me a chance to do a 15-minute survey about my favorite color for $200, you bet I'm signing up. I will answer it however they want me to answer it. And that's not what you want your participants to do. So we need to see that compensation value and just really make sure that it is fair and not too much. The last thing that kind of comes hand in hand with these tasks that the participants are asked to do are the data collection instruments. So this is really, we just want to see exactly what data you are trying to collect. We need to see your survey questions or your interview questions. We need to see any secondary data points that you're getting. So if you're collecting their date of birth and their favorite color and their mom's maiden name, we need to know all of that. Really, that kind of helps us make sure that we are reviewing exactly what we need to be reviewing, that we are looking at all the right information, and that we know what to look for. But this also helps us make sure that what the participants are being asked to do is in line with your study objectives. So, for example, if you're asking participants to take part in a program that is not related to your study, that's something we need to know. If you're supposed to be reviewing a math program for students in school and you start asking them about their gender identities, those are two really unrelated things. So for us, having all those data collection instruments, having all your survey questions or your interview questions is really important, because really ultimately that's the kind of meat on the bone of your study, and what we need to be ensuring is safe for the participants and in line with what your study's objectives are. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions or you just want more information, feel free to visit our website at www.solutionsirb.com, or you can reach out to us at correspondence@solutionsirb.com, or give us a call at 855-226-4472. Thanks for watching.